Hello everyone. You're welcome to ClassicsNow 2020, a new festival funded by the Arts Council of Ireland, exploring the art and ideas of the ancient Greeks and Romans in the company of some of our finest writers and directors, Irish and international. I'm Paula Shields, and our task at hand today is Antigone, Sophocles' masterful tragedy from Athens in the 5th century BC. If ever there was a play for polarized times, this is it. The tale of certainties, Antigone versus Creon, the new ruler of Thebes. It's the most performed of the Greek tragedies. Irish writers have made it their own. Everyone from Tom Paulin and Seamus Heaney to Owen McCafferty and Colin Tobin. And it's been adapted by my guests today. Conall Morrison, writer and director, has looked at the Israel-Palestine conflict through Antigone, and he has taken the play to Stormont in Belfast. Meanwhile, hot off the press, the writer Colin Murphy has just finished a new adaptation set in 2020. Colin is no stranger to political drama and has explored Irish subjects from the Easter Rising to the infamous 2008 Irish government bank guarantee in his stage and screenplays. Conall has also adapted and directed other classical plays, including Euripides' The Bacchae at the Abbey Theatre, when it became the Bacchae of Baghdad, and Shakespeare's Richard II in Palestine. Conall. Antigone turns up in poetry, literature, art, film, opera, as well as theatre. And the one thing I didn't mention in the intro are all the international writers who've adapted it as well, including, more recent adaptations like the Canadian poet Anne Carson. Why does Antigone still have such resonance 2,000 years later?
Well, I think, first of all, she's such a compelling dramatic character. And a young woman, which is significant, even if it's coming out of a very, very patriarchal, slave-based society in ancient Athens. But she's an absolute dynamo, and the play itself is a dramatic flamethrower. It's incredibly exciting. So I think people are very much drawn to that. But it's a superb unfolding of so many things, so many themes about law and justice and the relationship between the citizen and the state, all of it fused with a superb emotionalism and a depth of psychology that hasn't really been bettered in 2,500 years of playwriting.
Colin?
Yeah, for me, it's the fundamental or the archetypal story of the conflict between the citizen and the state, and the clash of rights, and implicit in that questions of what is society, what are the compromises that we make, what is the sovereignty over ourselves that we give up in order to accept that we live in a community, and how are we prepared to let that be infringed upon, and when are we forced to stand up against that? So that's an eternal conflict that goes back to the first people who decided to live together in a village. And still, as we've just been marking this past week, obviously in the US election, kind of defines a lot of an awful lot of our lives. And Antigone is one of the first, or maybe the first, but certainly the essential story that folds that conflict into it.
I just want to flag at this point as well that there is a new film of Antigone being screened this weekend in association with this festival. And it's set in contemporary Montreal, where Antigone's family are refugees from Algeria. It's by Quebecois director Sophie de Raspe, and it can be streamed. It's available all weekend for anybody who wants to have a look. How we bury our dead in Ireland has changed in ways this year we couldn't have foreseen before this pandemic. Why did it matter, Colin, in ancient Greece? What's at stake?
I suppose it's one of the things that sets us apart as humans, that we honor our dead. We not just that we remember them, but we mark that passing over. We are conscious of our lack of understanding, and we grapple with that through the rituals that we afford death and burial, and so that's always been there, and I think we all feel very closely this year in particular what a violation it feels like when how we expect to be able to do that is threatened. I mean, I think one of the interesting and not intuitive things about the experience of the pandemic, I think, has been that one of the things that has been most upsetting is that infringement upon or violation of funeral rights. So logically, what should be most upsetting is illness and death itself. Actually, when people talk about it, the kind of hurt they express and the hurt we all share, I think, is often around that. It's around that being the saying goodbye, and so I don't know that it was necessarily more important to the Greeks. They marked it with different kinds of rituals, but the violation of not being able to give the dead a proper burial is an essential one. And I think what Sophocles found or saw in the story of Antigone was, well, you know, by drilling into this, by taking sort of the extreme scenario of two brothers and one honored and the other literally left to rot, that enables him to get into something that's absolutely essential to the human condition.
Conall, Polynices went to war against Thebes, against his own brother. So in some ways, Creon's attitude, isn't it understandable?
Yes, indeed it is. It's about the necessary assertion of the rule of law and what you have to do to hold the body politic together, you know, and that just plunges us straight into the conflict between, say, the natural sense of justice or the reverence for the dead versus the demands of the state and what rights the state has to exert over its citizens. Just on the burials, I mean, every country has this, be it the cenotaph in London or the Vietnam memorial walls in the States. But Ireland has a particular, you know, sort of fascination with that connection between the personal and the political, be it around the funerals of hunger strikers, or going back to Pierce and the fools, they've left us our Fenian dead, and while Ireland holds these graves, Ireland and free will never be at peace. The kind of the politicization of death absolutely intertwined with its personal significance. Heaney was partly inspired by to write The Burial of Thebes by the interruptions of the funeral of Francis Hughes, the hunger striker. So it's something that is deeply felt, as Colin says, goes absolutely to the core of what it is to be human. That we respect the death and what may or may not be an afterlife. But its political significance in certain situations can be incredibly highly charged.
And of course, Heaney's, oh, sorry, Colin, go on.
Just on that, I think one of the difficulties that people can maybe have coming raw to Antigone in the original, or in, you know, and often we get the original through sort of early 20th or late night Victorian translations of it that can be quite obscure, and people look at how Antigone, how she esteems the rituals of death, and it seems kind of a bit obscure, and then also the political context in which they're in is also obscure, and therefore Creon can just seem like a tyrant, because in a sense he's sort of randomly inflicting this unnecessarily grotesque kind of punishment. And what this year and the pandemic gives us a chance to perceive is, well, actually it can be necessary for the state to police or discipline the nature of funeral rituals, and that may have been how Greeks saw the story of Antigone. At that point, it may not have been unreasonable that a ruler may attempt to define who can and cannot be buried in order to foster the sense of solidarity and also fear amongst citizens in a city that was always under siege.
Yes, I mean, Athenians at the time, you imagine, would have understood the need. His argument is cogent about the need for loyalty to the city-state above all else. Sorry, Conall?
No, just to pick up on what Colin is saying in terms of the central energy of Antigone still connecting with us. I can imagine that there are funerals, you know, there are families today who had to have, you know, especially at the toughest regimes, tiny funerals of 10, who are still feeling outraged that the state intervened and demanded that they have such a kind of a small send-off, you know. So their natural sense of justice like Antigone, will be outraged that the state has intervened, although, as Colin says, the state makes the argument that this is for the communal good. So that's the central quarrel in Antigone in a nutshell.
Yeah, I mean, and Heaney himself said around the time of the burial at Thebes that, you know, Sophocles has something of Antigone and Creon in him. You know, he's an elite Athenian, he believed in the rule of law, and yet, of course, he would have understood the individual's urge to act in a certain way as an artist as much as anything else.
Well, he did, but as a superb dramatist, he made sure that he parceled out the arguments very, very evenly. He knows that the best drama comes out of right versus right, you know, so that you move between the two, and then you are left to make your own decision. This was Hegel's favorite play. He said it was the absolute model of the dialectic, that, you know, Creon was a thesis, Antigone was the antithesis, and it was up to the audience to create the antithesis. You know, you go off and make your decisions from the superbly balanced argument, and that's the hallmark of its genius.
One of the things that interests me is it's easy to sell Antigone as this, you know, glorious heroine, you know, doomed child of a doomed father, wretched child of a wretched father is the quote. But Sophocles gives us Ismaili, and he gives her to us in that opening scene. He gives her the sister who's reacting differently. Colin, what are your thoughts on Ismaili and what he's up to there?
Yeah, it's crucial, isn't it? The sort of the political moderate, if you like, you know, the one who sees the justice in her sister's rebellion, but also sees the pragmatic need to go along with the authority, you know. So, like, again, I think, I mean, we can't, but we're speaking the week of the at the end of the week of the US election, so you can't but be influenced by that. I mean, I think probably both of you and a lot of the audience will have been watching a lot of the kind of US cable news and stuff, and one of the questions I think people all find themselves asking is, you know, well, if you were a Republican, what would you do? You know, and we sort of think, well, you should be standing outside and opposing this megalomania, but isn't there a need also for people to remain inside and try to work with it, or bring it down, or influence it, or shape it, or however? And so Ismaili, for me, I mean, coming at this, I suppose, very much through a kind of political lens, is an opportunity to look at that. So it's not just law in Creon versus personal integrity, if you like, in Antigone, and a clean binary dichotomy, that there is a figure in the middle who could go either way, and who's seeking and failing to reconcile them, even as the play goes on.
Ismaili also represents a fear in face of the state's power. You know, she sort of says, listen, we can't go up against Creon. You know, he'll kill us. You know, she's timid, which is opposed to, you know, Antigone's kind of fundamentalism, that kind of righteous fury that she has. So it dramatizes what does it take and what are the consequences of going up against the state. So they represent two different positions there.
And also she's a way in for us, of course, because we are Ismaili. I mean, you know, most of us will never be in that authority, and will not have it in us to stick so purely to principle at such risk. So there's an every woman quality to her.
Colin, let's go to your adaptation. Let's go to 2020. How did you decide which strands of this action-packed year to include? What's your take?
Yeah, so it didn't start with 2020. You know, it started with kind of a long-standing interest in the play, you know, and of Antigone, and actually a couple of years ago, completely separately, I got interested in Ebola, the story of Ebola, and I've been reading up on it, and I was thinking there was a play to be found there. And one of the things that I came upon reading about the Ebola outbreak in West Africa in 2014 was how funerals were super spreader events. So the great tragedy of Ebola was that the dead body as being contagious. And so what happened was the authorities came in, and the outsiders and the aid workers, and they banned the funerals, and they came in with their hazmat suits, and they literally ripped the bodies away. And of course, what happened in response was people started hiding their dead and having secret funerals, and it just got worse. So I'd had this kind of interest in the politics of death and that clash between individual rights and state authority. It was sort of simmering there, and then so that obviously recurs then this year, and the other thing that comes up this year is radically new questions in our life experience around political authority. And the nature of the state of emergency, and the idea that that democratically elected governments can suddenly turn around and impose restrictions on us that we would never have imagined. That even in January, when we looked at them in China, we thought, well, that can never happen here. And so those two, for me, the two really resonant issues, questions this year, both intellectually and emotionally, have been that around the issue of death and around the issue of political authority, and that's what Antigone was. So I think it was just sort of fortuitously it all came together in my head around the idea that this could be an interesting time to look at that play. And there was a third strand as well, which was that I'd been thinking a lot about the Mediterranean migration crisis, and as a journalist, I've been writing about it to a degree. And you also there have a politics and a symbolism around the dead body, the body washed up on the beach, Mediterranean. Then you've also had that in the Rio Grande on the American-Mexican border, and the incredible weight that those photos we've had, those tragic photos of people trying to better themselves, drowned, washed up, the political currency those images have had. So all that kind of melded together, and what I'm still in the throes of doing, we're having a first reading, a public reading of my Antigone on the 28th of this month of November. So I'm still in the throes of getting to the end of a draft for that. As I'm trying to thread all that through Sophocles' story.
Conall, we'll come to the north, God knows, but I'd love to start with Israel and Palestine. So two things: that production of Antigone in 2003, you looked at the role of the media in that, as well as the representation of that situation, as well as the situation itself. Do you want to say something about that?
Yeah, I did set it against the kind of the Israeli-Palestine conflict. I had been commissioned to do a version of Antigone, and just at the same time, I was out in Tel Aviv just after a suicide bomber had killed 21 people in the Dolphinarium disco bomb, the suicide bombing. And interestingly, just before he set off the bomb, he went amongst the crowd that he was going to kill with his beating a drum, saying something's going to happen, which actually just struck me again when I was reading Seamus Heaney's poem Anything Can Happen, which is using Horace to explore the September 11th bombings. So that just set off a kind of a sort of a chain of associations for me, and it allowed me to work out that conflict between, again, right versus right, that post-Holocaust, the Israeli right to a place of sanctuary versus the obvious rights of the Palestinians. So I wanted to use the dilemma and the argument in Antigone just to reflect on that situation, but I also wanted to explore how things are mediated through imagery, and how I also wanted to. I was trying to do various sort of self-reflexive things to avoid my own sort of self-accusation of being exploitative of the situation. So I was sort of saying, look, I am sort of yoking my version of event to Antigone, to this Israeli-Palestine conflict. But I'm also saying that these things are kind of constructed versions. My version is as unreliable as any other mediated version. You know.
So looking at both your adaptations, talk to me about what you did with the chorus in that. Conall, I seem to remember you turned the chorus into one person. I think it might have been Bosco Hogan, if memory serves.
You know, Bosco played Tiresias.
Oh, he played Tiresias.
Northerner. Yeah, no, it was Simon O'Gorman played the one chorus. And that was partly economics, determining aesthetics, that we couldn't afford a group chorus. But I was kind of happier that way, as it was, that the chorus was kind of an interlocutor with Creon, with somebody who could speak to us, that he was our everyman, our every person, our guide. Now, initially, the chorus represents the community, who initially is kind of pro Creon. It's kind of going, yeah, it's fine. This makes us safe. We get you the necessary kind of rule of law. We feel secure with this. But as the play proceeds, it's like the shifting of public opinion, and the chorus begins to sympathize more with Antigone and Consul's Creon to bend and to show mercy. So interestingly, when I was meant to be doing it in Belfast, I've done a couple of different iterations in Belfast. COVID unfortunately denied us of the opportunity of doing a kind of a full production with a large community group in a loyalist area in East Belfast. We were going to have a kind of pro-am cast with some professional actors and some local actors and a very large community chorus. So that would have been the polis, that would have been the people saying, what does this mean for us? You know, that justice is not an abstraction, justice is how people have to live it. So we were looking forward to doing that, but unfortunately, COVID and the demands of the state crushed us.
You weren't going to the barricades like Antigone then?
No, indeed, but one does jib against it, you know, you do. Yeah. You absolutely feel as if your own liberties have been radically curtailed. So I think we have daily Antigone moments, don't we?
Well, Colin's play, I hope you don't mind me spoiling this, but, open the whole business of who's wearing masks and who isn't. So certainly there's our individual kicking against authority. How do you represent the chorus? How did you manage with that in your new play?
Yeah, so as Conall mentioned, it's the voice of the people, and early in the play, in fact, the chorus, and some versions described as the elder of the chorus speaks of an assembly of elders, and at one point I was wondering, gosh, the citizens' assembly, and actually what I hit upon kind of quite quickly, I suppose, was that, well, the voice of the people in society today is the media, and for a lot of this year I've acquired the habit of watching CNN. It's on my telly package, and I started for the Trump COVID press conferences, and I've got very interested in the grammar of that kind of cable news, which is a little bit different to our own news broadcasting, and so I writing the play at the moment very much with Zoom in mind, because there's no immediate prospect of a stage production. I think I'm kind of writing it in that grammar of small screens, and so I've divided the chorus up into two voices. One is the anchor, the television news anchor, and the other is the pundit. So that allows me to give them arguments within them, within the individual moments or scenes of the chorus, and then also to track them as they're influenced by the events that they're reporting on. And then there's a messenger in the play as well, and it's one of the idiosyncrasy, anachronisms of Greek drama. I think now is through today's lenses, there's an awful lot of reported action, off-stage action, as there is in Shakespeare, and as is seen as sort of unsexy or bad dramatic writing today, but actually that's, of course, that's the grammar of news reporting. So what I had there was, I realized that the messenger would actually fit in, rather than being something I would try and work around. Actually embracing the messenger as a reporter would fit very neatly into my structure or architecture of cable news.
Oh, also workshopped Antigone in Palestine, in Ramallah, with a theatre company there. How did that go?
That was very interesting indeed. It was a friend of mine who'd seen the production that I did in Dublin and of Antigone, and they recommended it to their friends in Palestine. So they had me out for a week, and to see would it be a fit for their theatre company. So we workshopped it between English and Arabic, the song and various things, exploring the play and discussing the kind of the wider kind of connection with their own society. And it was a fascinating week with the company, but it was almost as interesting for why it didn't work ultimately as to why it maybe might have. They said at the end of the week, look, thanks very much. That was a great week and we had wonderful discussions, and we can see why they didn't really know the play, said why this is such a remarkable piece of drama, but this isn't for us. And I'll tell you why, because Sophocles and your version of it, Conall, just actually explores this debate far too evenly. It's there is just too good a dialogue between the different opposing positions. That is not how we experience our political reality. We do not have a dialogue with the Israeli powers. It's a monologue of power from them to us, and we do not have answer back, or where we can kind of shout and bleat and complain, but they will just keep, building the settlements, building the wall, depriving us of our water, whatever it is. So there is no debate. So they said, thank you, no, not for us. And we parted as friends.
There's nothing like being on the ground, is there, for a different perspective?
No, absolutely. And again, you realize that your own sort of adherence to this, isn't this fascinating that we have this debate, we can discuss the conflict between codified law and the limits of natural justice. That may well be just a kind of a Western liberty that other people do not have.
Mm. Colin, to what extent is this a play about leadership?
Yeah, hugely. Yeah. So again, take a case study. Earlier this year, the public perception of the then Taoiseach Leo Varadkar as a leader transformed almost overnight. He went from quite kind of low ratings and certainly a sense that the public had tired of him and an unsuccessful election, to stratospheric poll ratings, stratospheric approval levels. And he did that, obviously through circumstances, but through the power of rhetoric largely, and communications and the media, and behind that, right decisions and taking the right advice and that. But the way in which his couple of early speeches, particularly the St. Patrick's Day one, hit a nerve and resonated, was fascinating to not just to watch that but also to be part of it as a fellow citizen and somebody who was scared, and so that, I think, has given me kind of quite an acute sense of the responsibility and also that the character of Creon has in this play, and the responsibility that he's feeling to his people, the doubts that he must have around his authority and legitimacy as a ruler, and the way in which he uses political rhetoric, obviously underpinned by the force of law and military power behind that, but this rhetoric is the first tool or weapon for him. I think is kind of fascinating. And again, it's something that if you looked raw at the Greek, you might find quite alien. But again, this year I think has helped us to see that afresh, and as something that's much more contemporary.
Conall, what do you think of the leadership question in Antigone?
again, I think he's just such a superb dramatist that he makes a great case for Creon. I mean, Creon is autocratic. He is rather intemperate, you know. He has his obsessions. Yeah, he is very much a sexist male who believes that women's voices are not as important as men. But he makes a great case for we must cleave to the rule of law, otherwise we will have chaos and we will have anarchy, and this will involve sacrifices, you know. And just again, as a great dramatist, he makes sure that not that the devil is the best tunes, but that Creon has superb arguments. And just as Colin's been saying, we're seeing it now in a very extreme version, or a very, you know, graphic version, where the our leaders are saying, well, these are the rules that you have to adhere to for the public good. And as a general rule, we're going with it, you know, bar a couple of, you know, crazies going out and picketing RTE. So you know, so that model is you know, 2,500 years old. It still very, very much applies today.
But of course, we also have the counterexample of places where the leaders have not either sought to or been able to deploy the rhetoric and the authority and the respect necessary to reassure their public and to make sure they row in behind the restrictions. So, you know, it's useful to have that counterexample, that if the polity is in genuine crisis and you don't have somebody of Creon's skill and authority, then you're in trouble.
Certainly, as a northerner who's lived in the south for quite a long time, you know, I'm conscious of how compliant we are here and how, you know, we mostly go along with, and that the northern situation just is more complicated historically and now. But Conall, talk to me about Stormont. Talk to me about a colloquium with George Steiner and the Attorney General in the grandeur of that building on Antigone.
Yes, just Antigone as a superb dramatization of kind of, you know, legal dilemma. The Attorney General, he's just retired now after 2 terms of office. It was called John Larkin. He's a classicist and a man who believed that lawyers and judges should not just focus on the law, they should read philosophy and poetry widely to explore nuances of thought and alternative possibilities. So he knew that I'd done a version of Antigone and asked me would I be interested in bringing it up to Belfast, so and exploring it there. So we set up a colloquium in his offices with a couple of actors, a gathered audience of largely made up of lawyers and judges, and myself and some actors, you know, talking about Antigone, and the Justice Minister Ford was there, and Karen Lee Cullen from Sinn Féin, and George Steiner, the man who literally wrote the book on Antigone, Antigone's astonishing work of scholarship, exploring all the different versions of Antigone. He gave a wonderful talk. I think initially the lawyers and the judges were there because the Attorney General had issued the invitation, so there was a 3-line whip. But by the end of the session, you could see that they were absolutely kind of galvanized by the kind of the quality of the debate and the, you know, how superbly Antigone, the play, and Sophocles had laid out these absolutely vital questions. And exactly as you say, it's a very, very, in the North, it's a very, very live issue ongoing, that the rule of law says with the Good Friday Agreement, we're going to have amnesties, people are allowed out of prison after a couple of years. But the bereaved say this absolutely offends my sense of natural justice. The person who killed my son or brother or sister, whoever, how dare they be allowed to walk the streets, as well as people, the parents and the relatives of the disappeared, who do not still have a body to grieve over. So the issues are absolutely still cracklingly alive up there, and that kind of colloquium just made that graphically clear. Again, the Attorney General wanted to take it further, so we staged a version of it in the Great Hall in Stormont for a wider audience and for various MLAs. And he wanted to kind of to cite the play in the seat of power in the North, which of course is charged with all sorts of significances, good and bad. Stormont. So we did it again, full stage reading, and then a post-show discussion, which again was very galvanizing. Interestingly, one of the people talking was Raymond McCartney, Sinn Féin MLA, who'd been a hunger striker. So, so in terms of using your body as an instrument of revolt and protest, and arguably taking it to the ultimate stage, well, he knew whereof he spoke.
Talk about site-specific. The idea of speaking truth to power, we're kind of coming to the end here, and there are just a couple of things I'd love to raise. The idea of speaking truth to power, when you think the power is wrong, again, you can't not think about the White House. But Colin, talk to me about that, and talk to me about the role of, Tiresias comes in fairly late in the play, but just that whole notion of Antigone is the first to take on Creon, but just that idea of, what do you do about power if it's wrong? There's a question that isn't going away anytime soon.
Yeah. So I suppose it dramatizes the spectrum of what you do. So obviously Antigone is the unbending opposition to it. She will not tolerate this violation. So that's the pure civil disobedience. And Ismaili is afraid of power and really doesn't see, probably correctly, that it's going to do any good. And in fact, Antigone is just going to damage, her sister in doing this. So Ismaili sees, I suppose, agrees in principle with Antigone, but is cowed. And then you have Tiresias, who is absolutely the insider within the system. Sorry, I can't help but refracting this through how I've been thinking about it. So Tiresias is the seer, the old blind man led by the boy who consults with the runes and does his rituals and makes prophecies. And again, in the original, that can seem very obscure. And the analogy I've found is with the political advisor, Malcolm Tucker, Alistair Campbell, whoever you like, tend to be hate figures, but essential figures in the political system. So that's who my Tiresias is the one who can whisper in the ruler's ear, and his advice is good. So there's the spectrum. Jesus is the one within the system trying to counsel the authority to bend, and between him and the chorus, my version of the media, but essentially representing the people or the elders amongst the people, they are persuaded by Antigone, and too late, obviously, but nonetheless they do persuade Creon to turn. And Conall, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's an emotional turn. I mean, it's Creon buckling to the emotional force, not the intellectual force of the argument. I don't think he conceives. I don't think that no, the state should never do this. But it's more that actually, well, in this particular case, the state cannot kill this particular young woman. The emotional force of this is too strong, and he buckles to that.
It's emotional, and it's the realizing, the dawning on him that he actually has offended the gods. In the play, that whenever the gods have spread pestilence everywhere, as Tiresias explains, he realizes that he is offended against the human and he is offended against the divine. So it's both. It's both in the original anyway. Yeah.
Yes, because he values man-made law above all, or certainly that's his starting position in this play. And we're thinking, this is a Greek tragedy. That is not a good choice to make.
And he values, like all autocrats, he values his own opinion. You know, we're seeing with Trump that he is more important than American democracy. It's all about him. Again, this is the greatness of the playwriting, that these characters are not just one position. There's a depth of psychology behind them. So Creon has wonderful social political arguments, but he's also very much coming from his own vanity, his own conviction about his own rightness and so on. And that is shattered by the end of it. So it is quite a significant turnaround at great cost and too late.
And when Tiresias gives him advice he doesn't want to hear, what does he do? He accuses him of being corrupt. He accuses him of having been bought. You know, like it's incredibly contemporary.
Yeah. But these Antigone, like a lot of the Greek plays, they're actually ultimately they are pleas for moderation. You know, that they say Antigone and Creon, they both have kind of reasonable positions, but they take them to unreasonable ends. You know, they both apply a kind of either an autocracy or a fundamentalism to it. And it's that causes multiple death, collapse, widespread pestilence. So basically it sort of says that anybody who takes things to these absolute extremes is going to cause damage to themselves and to everybody, you know. And so ultimately the play comes out the other side and says, listen, really, as your mother said, moderation in all things.
It's a very good place to leave this discussion. I'm so sorry, there's so many things we could chat about. My thanks to Conall Morrison and to Colin Murphy, and to you, the audience, for joining us. The Lexicon Library in Dún Laoghaire is hosting a rehearsed reading of Colin's new adaptation on November the 28th, which will be broadcast online. Details on the Lexicon's website and on Colin's Twitter page @ColinMurphyInfo. And that new film I mentioned of Antigone by Sophie de Raspe is being screened all this weekend via the digital platform IFI at Home. Further details on the film and other events this weekend at this festival are on the website classicsnow.ie. Many thanks again, stay well, and goodbye for now.